It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, courts crisis. The victims of crime waiting up to 4 years for justice. We hear from barristers and court staff who say they're working in a broken system, with the long adjournments becoming unbearable for those waiting for their perpetrator's day in court.
The more that you delay matters, you'll see a lot of victims withdrawing from the system because they just think, what's the point?
We'll have a special report from our national correspondent, Tom Parminter. Also tonight, a warning over the rapid rise in flu cases. Cases are most prevalent in children. The Chief Medical Officer says all who are eligible should get the flu jab. We'll take a look at the numbers. Plus, the additive being put in dairy cows' feed to cut methane emissions that's led social media users to pour their milk down the drain. And police search for a dog owner in southwest London after a deer was chased and fatally injured in a royal park. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. We start tonight with a crisis in UK courts, with victims of crime having to wait up to 4 years to see their alleged perpetrator face justice. We've spoken to barristers, court staff, even a judge in the middle of a trial, who say delays are becoming intolerable and the system is breaking down. Every week, the backlog just gets bigger, and a growing number of victims are pulling out of legal proceedings because they simply don't believe that justice will ever be done. Our national correspondent, Tom Parminter, has this report.
Any one of us could end up in court. You could be a victim or accused of a crime. You might just witness something happen. But the criminal court system is on its knees, which means people are waiting years for justice.
I don't like saying it's broken. It makes me sad. But it's broken because it's not effective. It's not functioning in the way it used to function.
We spent 2 days at Leicester Crown Court with leading barrister Mary Pryor.
There's this old saying, isn't there? Justice delayed is justice denied.
She explained that the police are charging more people, the courts are struggling to keep up. There's shortages of administrative staff, barristers and judges. The prison vans are often running late.
It's incredibly difficult to have to look people in the eye and say, I'm sorry, your trial's going to be adjourned until 2025, 26, 27, and now 2028.
Cameras aren't allowed inside, but we have spent time in the courtrooms, the corridors, the barrister's robing room to witness this problem unfolding. In one hearing, the judge told us directly of his frustration at the delays and the problems they cause. And a prosecutor told us that it means people are getting away with crimes.
We saw the grapple to plug the gaps. Junior barristers like Annabelle having to jump onto unexpected cases with no notice.
It's a lot of pressure. It's stressful. It's quite literally, in my view, the foundation of society, because if you think about it, if we don't have a functioning criminal justice system, we are in a position where you have people roaming the streets who are committing serious offences and there's no retribution for that.
Battling the system too is Giles. After 3 attempts, he'd finally had one of his cases dealt with.
There are so many days when you have to look at yourself in the mirror and just steel yourself and realise you're going to face a day of being in the most unbelievable series of errors or series of issues which you never thought you'd have to face that day. But it all comes from the fact that there's just so many cases going through the system.
And it re-traumatises the victims of crime.
It's draining. Physically, you don't want to get out of bed. Victims I've spoke to feel, what's the point of going forward? And the more that you delay matters, the more that you question yourself. And that's why you'll see a lot of victims withdrawing from the system because they just think, what's the point?
After just 2 days in Leicester, it's clear how unsustainable this is.
I really worry that we will end up in a situation where people take the law into their own hands. That's the risk. It's fixable, but it requires a significant investment from the police, court staff, the court buildings, criminal barristers and criminal solicitors, probation service and prisons. You know, it all needs fixing.
The government told us it is committed to bearing down on the backlog in England and Wales. But the evidence from court shows the damage it's doing to a justice system that was once the envy of the world. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Leicester.
Well, Tom joins us now from Minshall Street Crown Court in Manchester. And Tom, in your report there, you referred to the fact that a judge spoke to you in the middle of a trial. Such is the state of things, such is the frustration. The judge asked you and your producer, Emily, what you were doing there. And when you explained it to him, he decided to talk to you about it because judges, as a rule, don't give interviews. But this just shows the level of frustration that's being felt inside courtrooms.
Yeah, I think that was the moment when it hit home as to just how bad this has become in the courts system, which hopefully many of us won't need, but could at any point be thrust into that kind of system. And he was interested, the judge, as to why we were in his court, taking notes on what was a rather mundane case. And when we explained, he just went off on one, clearly infuriated by the situation he finds himself in, day out, having to inflict these long delays on the people at the heart of these cases, as well as everyone else trying to administer justice. And we've had countless examples of people who have had to move away from their home, who have been estranged from their families, who have lost their jobs while they've been waiting for that day in court, whether they've been waiting for their moment of justice or indeed whether they've been waiting for their hearing because they've been accused of a crime and they're waiting to try potentially to clear their name. It is deeply frustrating, agonising for many of the people involved. We're at Minshall Street Crown Court in the middle of Manchester this evening because this court was actually reopened in the 1990s as a measure to try to deal with the large volume of cases passing through the courts here in Greater Manchester. And it's that kind of radical thinking that many people are calling for now. This won't be fixed by an extra bit of cash or a short-term boost to the effort. This is fundamental change that is needed because of the seriousness and the depth of the problems that we saw in Leicester but exist in courts all over England and Wales. There are delays in Scotland, but the worst examples seem to be in many of the courts of England and Wales. And the people that we've spoken to, the barristers, say that this isn't the fault of one particular government. It's successive governments that haven't given the criminal justice system the priority and the funding that it needs to function effectively. And now we're seeing the consequences.
Tom, thank you. Tom Parmenter, live for us in Manchester tonight. We're joining us now, Chief Executive of the charity Victim Support, Katie Kempen. Katie, that will be a picture you are all too familiar with. Just listening to the frustration from all involved in this process, the fact that this system is crumbling and doesn't really seem to be serving anyone to its full, to the full letter of the law, as it were. What's it like to be a victim caught up in all of that mess?
Well, our victims will very much recognise the stories that we've seen tonight. So for the victims that we support, we find that the court process can actually be really re-traumatising for them. So we've already talked about court delays tonight. What we tend to see is victims are living their life in limbo, waiting for years.
Up to 4 years, we were hearing.
4 years is not uncommon. That's not shocking to us. And we're actually supporting somebody who's looking at 10 years at the moment. And what that means for those particular victims is their life's in limbo. They can't get on with education. They can't move on with jobs. They're waiting to relive an awful experience in court and are really struggling to move on. And what we also tend to see, as you've already referenced, is that you may get a court date, you may be working up to that court date, reliving in your head one of the worst experiences that's happened to you, only to get into court and find that your day's been adjourned and that you won't be coming back for months or potentially a year. And that's absolutely devastating for victims.
And the harsh reality is many are just simply giving up.
Absolutely, yeah. And they just... It's not so much they're giving up, it's just they feel that they can't go on. And we see, we've just completed a research report called Suffering for Justice, which explored the experiences of victims of sexual violence as they went through court. And it just documents a litany of failures. So very poor communication. We've looked after victims in the same household going to court for the same event, getting completely different information. We find that when you're at court, victims should be able to rely on rights that make the day that much easier for them. They shouldn't need to bump into the defendant while they're waiting to get into court. They should be able to rely on screens so they don't have to be stared at by the defendant while they're giving evidence. And we're finding just a litany of failures. These rights are not in place.
It seems like every aspect of the court system is crumbling. In Tom's online report, you can read it on skynews.com, he talks about the technology system in the court when he's at Leicester Crown Court, and it goes down for 3 or 4 hours. There's absolute chaos with barristers not knowing what courtroom they're meant to be in, how, you know, the information they need to represent these victims and perpetrators properly, because sometimes they're given a case with just a few minutes' notice. This is just one part of a multifaceted problem, isn't it? You know, there's prison overcrowding, barristers leaving the profession. We've been hearing in Tom's report about empty courtrooms because there aren't enough judges. This is a whole-scale problem.
It really is. And if you can imagine being the victim, and your perception is probably that if you're a victim of serious crime, it'll be treated quickly, seriously, and you get through court. The reality is very far from that. And if I may, I'd like to talk about some of our unsung heroes. So charities like Victim Support will be the glue that are kind of holding victims together throughout this whole process. So we will be communicating with them, we'll be advocating for them, getting updates for them, trying to take them to court beforehand to make them more at ease on the day, and sometimes literally sitting next to them in the courtroom when they're going through one of the worst experiences of their lives. And unfortunately, the funding for our services is really at a worrying point.
Who funds you?
We are funded primarily by the Ministry of Justice, and we're commissioned by local police and crime commissioners as well. And the Ministry of Justice, although the Ministry of Justice has had an uptick in its funding, victim services, we've been told this week, will be cut.
Have you been told why? Because, you know, again, going back to Tom's report, at the heart of it, he mentioned it at the end of our conversation, that the criminal justice system has got to this point because basically of a lack of investment.
No, I mean, we simply can't make sense of why it's been cut. Research report after research report tells us that if you've got support services in place for victims, they're significantly more likely to keep going through the court system. And that actually means that perpetrators will face justice. If these services aren't in place to keep victims together, to get the information they need, to give them the emotional support to get through court, then we're just going to see justice denied time and again.
And the support you provide, as you said, you'll be with them for months, years, however long it takes to get their day in court, because there is also the prospect of them getting into court years after the crime and the evidence not being what it was 2-3 years ago, because people's memories fade when they're cross-examined. Of course they have doubts. It happened 2 or 3 years ago. Are you finding that it's actually making that day in court more difficult once they get it?
We're finding that it's making it much more anxious for them. As you say, you know, remembering something that's happened 3 years ago and it's been hanging over your head that whole time is a really anxiety-inducing experience to go through. You need emotional support, you need practical support, you need help to kind of get you through that experience. And what we tend to see is actually victims just not feeling that they can go through the court service once their court date's been adjourned 2 or 3 times, just feeling that they can't go on. They really need us there to help them pick up the pieces, regroup, get that energy and get the justice that they deserve.
Katie, how do you keep them pushing forward?
Oh, I need to pay testament to my amazing colleagues, actually, who give their all. Actually, these are not well-paid members of staff, and they give their all to the victims that they support. They contact them, they make sure they're updated, they give them emotional support, they help work through emotional support plans with them, just give them little goals to aim for in life that just kind of keep them going through some really acutely distressing circumstances.
How angry are some of the victims you speak to who are, you know, people do have their day in court. There are trials happening every single day up and down the UK. So it is working. It's just not working effectively for everybody as it should. We heard a barrister there in Tom's report saying that she is worried that people are actually going to take the law into their own hands because they don't trust the system anymore. A barrister telling Tom anonymously, people are now getting away with crimes because of the delays, cases that never actually go ahead because people pull out or there's nobody to take them. I'd say that's happening most weeks now. What are your fears if this isn't sorted out?
I think our fear is really, it is the justice delayed is justice denied, that victims are not getting that chance to go through the criminal justice system and actually see their case all the way through. And more than that, what victims want is to be treated with respect while they're going through that system, to be given just the basic respect of accurate communication, of being getting a timeline that they can understand. And rather than being angry, what our report Suffering for Justice really showed is that when court dates were adjourned, there was real acute distress. There was real... that victims talked to us about how it just devastated them. The emotional impact of those court adjournments was so acute that it just made it hard for them not only to get on with their case, but also to get on with life. I can't emphasise enough just how much that system re-traumatised them. Not only have they already gone through an awful crime, but the system that should be getting justice is actually causing them significant harm.
Katie, thank you so much for coming on to talk to us tonight. Katie Kempen, their Chief Executive at Victim Support. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Veterans Minister fired a warning shot about the state of the country's military today, claiming that the entire British Army would be depleted in 6 months to a year if the UK were to be dragged into a major war. Al Carnes, who's a reservist and former colonel in the Royal Marines, said that the UK needs a wider pool of reserves from right across society. And tonight, the head of the armed forces issued a stark warning, saying the world has entered a third nuclear age. Our Security and Defence editor, Deborah Haynes, has this report.
The starkest of warnings from the UK's military chief about a new era of nuclear threats.
We are at the dawn of a third nuclear age, which is altogether more complex. It's defined by multiple and concurrent dilemmas, proliferating nuclear and disruptive technologies, and the almost total absence of the security architectures that went before. From Russia, we have seen wild threats of tactical nuclear use, large-scale nuclear exercises, and simulated attacks against NATO countries.
Alarm bells, too, about the ability of conventional British troops to fight.
In a war of scale, not a limited intervention, but one similar to Ukraine, our army, for example, and current casualty rates would be expended, yes, part of a broader multinational coalition, in 6 months to a year.
In Ukraine, Russia is said to be losing around 1,500 soldiers a day, killed or injured. An attrition rate its army is able to absorb by drafting in more and more civilians. It's why some say professional armies start wars, but civilian armies finish them. And why the UK government may be wanting to rebuild its reserves. In the Cold War, the UK had a large part-time military force, including something called the Strategic Reserve. It comprised tens of thousands of personnel who'd left full-time service but could be called upon in a crisis. They'd be trained once a year and had kit ready to use. But that costs money. Now, the part-time force is much smaller, and the Ministry of Defence doesn't even know who all the members of its Strategic Reserve are. Yet this is all about choice and what societies want to prioritise. For many years, that's been economic growth, health, schools. Military chiefs say there must be more focus on defence. But will the public agree? Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
So to come on the UK tonight, police are searching for the owner of a dog that fatally attacked a deer in London's Richmond Park. We'll be speaking to the park manager. Also ahead, a warning that cases of winter flu are on the rise. We'll take a look at the numbers. And last year's viral sensation, Charlie's Bar in Enniskillen, returns with a new Christmas advert that gets you right in the festive feels. We'll be speaking to the pub manager.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Nice to see you. How are you feeling?
Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention
to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Connor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death. Scotland has a shameful record, worse than England, the worst in Europe.
Why not just say you've failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder. Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news.
It's over, isn't it?
The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster. This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country. A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Ennis after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
Sky News. The full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Now, a few years ago, you couldn't go a day without hearing Sir Chris Whitty's name. And England's chief medical officer has issued a warning this week, not about COVID, but about flu. Professor Whitty says cases are rising rapidly, and he's urging those who are eligible to get vaccinated. But for a health service already feeling the strain, just how bad will this flu season be? Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, has been looking at the numbers.
The festive season is nearly upon us, but it looks like the flu season might be here already. Cases, according to Chris Whitty, the chief medical officer, are now rising rapidly. So how worried should we be? Well, in the last couple of weeks, cases rose sharply. In the latest data, flu positivity rates up to the 26th of November were at 6.5% compared to 3.9% the week before. Low, but rising as fast as they did in the 2022-23 season, which was the worst we've had in 5 years. Flu appears to be rising fastest in school-aged children. Now, that's fairly typical, as viruses like flu spread easily in schools, and it's the main reason kids are offered a vaccination to protect the elderly who are most at risk of getting seriously ill. Now, on that front, the situation isn't too bad. Hospital admissions for flu are still low and so far not rising as fast as cases. However, the CMO has just authorised the use of antiviral drugs against flu, routine when the season gets underway, but triggered in part because of a doubling of flu outbreaks in care homes in the latest week.
It is very early days in the flu season and we are higher than we were this time last year. We do expect hospital admissions to continue to increase. So we'd urge anyone who hasn't yet received their vaccine and is in an eligible group to get vaccinated.
On vaccines, uptake in the over 65s, one of the most vulnerable groups, is currently tracking below 2023. However, jabs for most adults were rolled out a month later this year to try and ensure longer protection through the winter season, so coverage is expected to rise a bit more. It's really too early to tell how bad this flu season might be, but what went on down under can be a guide. Australia's winter flu season during our summer was nasty. The peak in cases here in turquoise spread over 4 months and was the highest number of cases they've had in 6 years. Now, this can't serve as a prediction. So many factors, even how cold it is, come into play. The situation in Australia was attributed in part to low vaccine uptake. However, warning enough to anyone eligible for a flu jab here in the UK who hasn't yet had one.
Police are searching for a dog owner whose pet was filmed chasing and fatally injuring a deer in Richmond Park, southwest London. The Royal Parks Police posted this clip of the incident online and are appealing for witnesses to the attack that happened at lunchtime on Monday. The deer had to be put down because of its injuries. Well, I'm joined now by the park manager of Richmond Park, Paul Richards. Paul, thank you for joining us on the programme tonight. We're showing part of the video there that was filmed by an onlooker. Perhaps you could describe to us what happened next.
So it's a tragic incident. Obviously, as the video sort of illustrates, the dog sort of was out of control, chased the herd of deer, singled out one particular deer, which was a sort of a young male deer, chased it and sort of singled it out and then chased it. And as you can sort of see, chased it across the road. Obviously, traffic did stop. But the dog did catch up with the deer, and unfortunately, due to the injuries carried out by the dog, we had to put the deer down. So, as I said, real tragic incident by a dog that wasn't under control.
Yeah, Paul, really sad events. And Richmond Park, for those who don't know it, there are a number of parks up and down the UK where deer roam in the park. There are cars that go through the park, dog walkers, cyclists, and it all operates perfectly harmoniously most of the time. But, you know, you do see the odd incident, often not with these kind of fatal consequences, but you do often see people going too close to deer because obviously there are no fences, people are lulled into a false sense of security. I myself have seen someone picked up by a deer, the antlers getting caught up in the jumper and being thrown across the grass, and they sort of laughed about it, but it can actually be quite dangerous. So what should people do in this situation, particularly if they're walking their dogs?
So as you sort of say, you know, the deer are wild animals, and that's certainly the case at Richmond Park, and we want them to remain wild. You know, we don't want them domesticated, and human intervention is a concern. It's a concern for the deer, but it's also a concern for our visitors. It's a concern for the visitors' dogs. So what we actually ask is, you know, when you visit Richmond Park, enjoy Richmond Park with your dog. But be aware that, you know, a dog can follow its own instincts. And though, you know, you sort of coming into the park with your family pet and, you know, interacts with your family, no problems at all. And then when you come into the park and it sees a herd of deer, you know, or if you go to a farm and it sees a sort of a flock of sheep, it then its natural instincts kick in and then it will start chasing the deer and obviously, you know, can end up with the fatality that we experienced on Monday. So what we're actually asking people to do is be aware of their dogs, to have that responsibility to keep their dogs under control. Now, if you can't, if you're not confident that your dog will come back when called, then just keep it on a lead. And I think that's the advice that we'd give. You know, avoid the deer, avoid any animals. You know, the park is a big place. You can sort of take your dog elsewhere, avoid the deer. But if you do come across deer, put your dog on a lead. And then have it under, you know, strict control. And then, you know, the dog won't come to any harm, the deer won't come to any harm, and visitors won't come to any harm. Because if the deer are startled in the way that you've been showing on the video, they can sort of, you know, run off and then be a danger to themselves and to a danger to others. So you get that stampede effect. And if they ran across the road and it's a busy road, you know, obviously there'd be further fatalities. If they ran into a group of people, and it was the big red deer, again, you know, the outcome would be, you know, a lot worse.
Yeah, rutting stags can weigh over 25 stone and reach speeds of up to 30 miles per hour, sort of underlining the dangerous situation that can occur if they are disturbed. So, as you said, keep a safe distance. They may seem beautiful and serene, but obviously they are wild animals. Just finally, you are appealing for more information about what happened on Monday. We have this video footage from someone who was quick thinking enough to film it, but you are appealing for the owner of the dog to come forward.
We are. Obviously, we work closely with our colleagues in the police, and they're keen to have a conversation with this particular gentleman. Unfortunately, you know, though those that were there and witnessed it, asked the gentleman to sort of stay around whilst they sort of called for assistance, but he decided that he was just going to take flight and sort of disappeared with his dog. So if anyone recognises the gentleman, please let us know, and obviously let the police know. As I said, we're keen to have a conversation with him.
OK. Well, Paul, thank you so much for coming on to talk to us tonight. And, you know, my condolences for what happened. Paul Richards there, Park Manager of Richmond Park, one of the Royal Parks. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Still to come here on the UK Tonight, I'm going to speak to the parents of murdered Gracie Spinks. This is after the government unveiled plans this week to give stalking victims better protection. And why some social media users are pouring milk down the drain because of a new cattle feed additive. We'll have the details for you. Hello, welcome back. This week, the government unveiled plans to give stalking victims better protection, including the right to know the identity of their abuser and new powers for the courts and police. New right-to-know statutory guidance will empower the police to release the identity of an online stalker at the earliest opportunity. Stalking protection orders, or SPOs, which ban perpetrators from going within a certain distance of their victims or contacting them, will be made more widely available. Courts will also be able to impose protection orders on those who have been acquitted of charges if there is evidence to suggest that they are still a risk to the victim. There will also be a new legal framework to help services work together to prevent potential victims from falling through the cracks. 3 years ago, Gracie Spinks was murdered by a former colleague who had stalked her. Several months before her death, the 23-year-old had reported her stalker, Michael Sellers, to Derbyshire police multiple times. The force apologised to Gracie's family and admitted failings in how they handled her complaints. I've spoken to Gracie's parents, Richard and Alison, And I started by asking them for their reaction to these new plans.
It's time there were changes. We've worked hard on this for 3.5 years to make changes in the police forces and how stalking's reported and how it's investigated. So we're really delighted that the police are going to be changing the way they operate. And I think it will ensure support services work together as well, all the different agencies.
Because, Alison, when we last spoke, we discussed the fact that stalking is about power. It's about stalkers trying to have power over their victims, and in some way these changes are an effort to put the power back in the hands of victims and the authorities who are trying to stop this behaviour. We also spoke about stalking protection orders, and I know that you both felt really strongly that if Gracie had been granted one of those, she'd still be with you today. And there was an announcement from the government on stalking protection orders, which is the ban that can stop alleged stalkers from contacting or being within a certain distance of their victims. The government has agreed to review the current legislation and to increase the use of these orders, which I know you'll see as a win today, Alison.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we know that the Nicola Thorpe case has really highlighted this as well, how she wasn't allowed to even know who was, stalking her. I mean, the fact that, that they're going to give out more stalking protection orders, we welcome greatly, as long as, there's proof in the pudding, so to speak, that it does actually work, and, look at it in a few months or a year or 2 years down the line to see if it is actually working. We visited Cheshire Police earlier this year, Richard and myself, and we see how actively they are using them, and it is working. We know it works. They've proven at Cheshire Police that it does work.
To be fair, Derbyshire have rolled a similar thing out in our own county as well.
Which I know you've been helping with.
It's not as developed as Cheshire. Yeah, yes. And we're quite pleased that that's happened on our doorstep, and the idea of Gracie's campaign is to roll that out across all 43 police forces, so that it's not a postcode lottery of the service you get if you report a crime. So we want that same amount of treatment on all of the police forces. That's what we aim to do next, basically. So that's our mission.
This is an attitude shift, isn't it, when talking about stalking, when treating the behaviours of stalking, and when it comes to protecting victims. I know today it was announced that they're going to set out national standards on stalking perpetrator programmes to ensure that consistency you were talking about across England and Wales. They're also going to define stalking in statutory guidance and set out a legal framework to help support services work together and make sure people are not failed by vital information being missed. So it sounds like the government are on the same page as you, but you talk about implementation. But with implementation also comes the next stage, which is monitoring. And I know that you really want that, Richard.
That's
you
right.
want there to be a proper system so that there's accountability here.
Yeah, it's all very well, saying you're going to do A, B and C and saying, yes, enthusiastically, this is going to work. But, we want to monitor this 6 months, a year, 18 months' time, look at the statistics and see if things have improved. So we're not going to let it go. So we'll be on this now, but we're very grateful for the changes. It's a fantastic step forward, and we really feel like we've achieved something. It's been 3.5 years of stress and dedication and a great support from a lot of people. So I'd like to thank all the people that have supported us over the years. It's been fantastic.
And we met with Jess Phillips, didn't we, last year? And she's amazing. We know that she's worked really, really hard. And like I said earlier, Nicola Thorpe, being a high-profile person, was highlighted this as well. So, I mean, we feel it's been a bit of a long time coming, but fantastic.
And we feel like everybody wants to do the same thing that we are suggesting. They're all behind us. Oh, you're doing a really good job. What you're trying to do will save lives. And I think that's ultimately what we want to do, and that's what Gracie would have wanted.
Sadly, through our own loss, it's highlighted to us how serious it is. I also have another young daughter who's 18, nearly 19. I worry about her and moving forward with how something like this could affect her. Thankfully, she's not been affected by anything like this at the moment, and hopefully she won't. But we just didn't realise until what happened to Gracie how bigger picture that what is happening out there.
A final question, if I may, Richard and Alison. What next? I know we've talked about these changes coming in, and we've talked about implementation and monitoring. we just need to change the attitude towards stalking, isn't there? Because there's a lot of talk about resources as well. Where are police forces going to get the extra resources from? Are you convinced they actually need extra resources to tackle this? Or does it just need to be taken seriously like many other crimes that are reported to them?
Absolutely, yeah, to be taken more seriously, better training. Yeah, the funds, extra funds would help, for sure, but changing their attitude, I think, and realising the seriousness of it and how it affects young people and how it still is, and it's ongoing, and, changes have got to be made, and I will say that to all the politicians and everyone involved, please, let's make a difference.
It is about educating people and not the ignorance of it as to how widespread and how big a problem this is. There's a lot of people that are living in fear out there, which we now realise, and some people are just really afraid to come forward because they're afraid of the repercussions from if they make a complaint. So let's hope that everything that's been announced today puts people at ease and maybe just come forward.
Social media users are pouring milk away in protest. It's all about a new additive in dairy cow feed that could reduce methane emissions. Now, the additive is called Bovaer, and according to Arla Foods, which owns the UK's biggest dairy cooperative, it could reduce greenhouse gas emissions from cows by up to 45%. It's been approved for use in this country, but concerns about its safety has spread like wildfire online, and there's even been conspiracy theories linking the additive to a depopulation plot. Well, it really caught my eye on social media this week. Let's talk about it with Professor of Nutrition and Food Science at the University of Reading, Günther Kühnle, who joins me now. Günther, good of you to talk to us about this, because it's gone crazy online over the last couple of days. Farmers taking to social media saying that they won't be using it. Viral videos, consumers pouring milk down the sink from suppliers that plan to use it. I've just explained a bit about what Bovaer is and what it is going to do, reduce methane emissions from cows. Why? Why is this all of a sudden becoming such a big issue?
Well, I think it's a very good question. And one way is probably the way Arla has handled this, by not accepting or anticipating that consumers might be worried about anything you put in the food chain. It's natural. People are worried about chemicals, whether it's right or wrong, whether we agree or disagree with it. A consumer wants their food they know is safe. And I think Arla should have explained before more about this product. If you look at all the risk assessment, it looks fine. But just saying, look, we know best, we tell you that this is fine, probably doesn't work very well.
Yeah, Arla's saying this is an innovation that should be applauded. Social media users have hashtagged it climate change milk. They want to know what's behind it because it's been deemed safe to use by the Food Standards Agency and other agencies around the world. But there have been some startling allegations about this additive online. What do we actually know about it? What are the facts?
So if you look at the risk assessment from the European Food Safety Authority, and I think this is the most comprehensive one, which one can easily access, there's nothing in there which causes concern. Yes, I think the problem is that in there it says, yes, the compound can be toxic, the compound can have adverse effect on health, but it's the amount. I think you would have to consume such a huge amount of dairy to actually get anywhere into the range of where this compound could potentially be harmful. That would be impossible. So weighing up these two aspects, yes, something can be dangerous, but not in the amounts you can consume. And I think this is difficult to explain, and this wasn't explained very well. The most important question for the consumers is, of course, how much do I get in my milk? If cattle is fed with this additive, how much do I get? And there's some fairly detailed studies looking into this. They used radioactive label of the additive, and that they do this because it's incredibly sensitive. If you use radioactive compounds, you can detect them at an incredibly low level. And using this, they couldn't really detect anything in a meaningful amount that they could quantify. So they know there might be something in there, but it's very, very small amounts. Yeah. And these very small amounts and all tests that have been done are not in any way causing concern. And I think explaining it that way, we do something to the cattle, but it won't happen, it won't affect the consumer, would have been probably more reassuring. And I think we need to accept that it's important to explain complex risk assessments, complex safety assessments in a way consumer understands and not in a way we know best. I think that's sort of a concern.
Yeah, because consumers are asking more questions now, aren't they, about what's in our food? We're talking more and more now about ultra-processed foods. We're talking more about milk alternatives, which were seen as the healthier and more environmentally friendly options. Now that's being questioned, and it turns out not so much so. What's in our milk? How safe is our milk to drink?
Well, that's a very complicated question. I don't think I can, because you can, of course, expand this to so many other aspects of milk, and I can't really talk about that. That's sort of beyond my expertise. But thinking about this additive, I don't see there's any reason to be concerned. But of course, consumers should have the choice to say, I don't want that, and I choose different milk. And I think in that way, if Arla wants to sell it, they need to convince the consumer it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, a bit more of an information campaign about it. Arla have been speaking out and probably will continue to do so. Gunther, thank you so much for coming on to debunk some of the myths about Bova. That's Gunther Kundler there, Professor of Nutrition and Food Science at the University of Reading. Well, we did ask the Food Standards Agency for their response to the claims about Bova that have been circulating online, and they told us that milk from cows given Bova, a feed additive used to reduce methane emissions, is safe to drink. Bova has undergone rigorous safety assessments and is approved for use in Great Britain. Still to come on the programme tonight, the Christmas advert from an Enniskillen pub that gets you right in the festive feels. Have your tissues at the ready. We'll be speaking to the bar's manager. And we'll explain why Crystal Palace's captain will not be facing a charge for writing a religious message on a rainbow armband.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure.
Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was the president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back. Coming up, the Enniskillen pub that went viral for their Christmas ad last year. They're back with another festive offering. We'll bring that to you in just a few minutes' time. But first, Teddy is here with a look at the sport. And Teddy, it is the week of the Premier League's Rainbow Laces campaign. This is to promote LGBTQ+ inclusion. But attention's really been taken away from the core message of this, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's got a lot of column inches, a lot of web content, a lot of discussion on programmes like this, radio and TV as well, but a lot of it centring on who is and who isn't wearing rainbow armbands and maybe rainbow jackets. We could start with the Ipswich captain, Sam Morsey, who's chosen on a couple of occasions not to wear the rainbow armband, which is part of this initiative. Captains of Premier League clubs have been encouraged but not required or mandated to wear these armbands. Just stress that. Ipswich have said that it's to do with Morsey's religious beliefs. He's a practising Muslim. On the other side of that as well, you were mentioning off air, there's been reports that Manchester United were planning on their own volition to give their players rainbow-themed jackets, which apparently one player declined, so the whole squad decided they wanted, in a show of unity, not to wear the jacket. And also, we can see behind us as well the arm of Mark Gahey, which says Jesus loves you on his rainbow armband. So he chose to wear the rainbow armband for 2 of Crystal Palace's matches. I love Jesus was his message on the weekend. Jesus loves you was the message there. And we can hear from him now. He's been speaking and says that, in fact, what he's trying to spread with this is a message of truth, love and inclusivity as a Christian.
I think the message was pretty clear, to be honest. It was a message of love, of truth as well, you know, and a message of, you know, inclusivity. So I think it speaks for itself.
Well, good for him to come out and explain exactly what he did because, you know, as we've just said, the sort of message of the rainbow armband has almost been lost in all the controversy about who's wearing it, who's not wearing it. And that decision taken by the Manchester United team to, you know, we're either all in or we're not, is sort of, it goes to the message of the fact that, you know, you need to understand where this is coming from. Otherwise, it's just tokenism, isn't it? You've just got to wear rainbow laces. Why are we wearing them? What do we think?
It's interesting because the Football Association, the governing body above the Premier League, in a sense, says you can't have religious messages on your equipment, but they're not going to take any further action. They've reminded Mark Gahey of their policy. But it's interesting that Liz Ward, formerly of Stonewall, is now working as a Football Association consultant, said that when people feel as though they're being told to do something, as opposed to really understanding it, it becomes more difficult. So that story, no doubt, will carry on. But meanwhile, it's a bumper night of Premier League football. Update you on 6 games next.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Pep Guardiola has dominated English football since his arrival, winning 6 out of 8 titles. I went to pick his brains on his own journey and how he sees football development in this country.
Starting in my little town, when I was born, like all, you know, the child in the neighborhoods, like in that time was no traffic lights in my little town, no cars, and all the time in the street. And after Academy Barcelona came, arrived with 13 years old, so all my life was there. And everything the Academy of Barcelona gave me, absolutely everything. Aware for the game, aware from how you have to behave, you know, in a group of people, you know, respect the managers and the institution, and everything. The club is more important than you. Accept that you are not good enough, you don't have to play, the effort, accept the defeats, many.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.